Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Dylan Scribner.
And I'm Rough Enough.
And I am Jeremy Duvall. Excited to continue our coverage on the beautiful jewels within the necklace of 4th edition, right? We haven't seen the whole necklace yet, but we're getting these little awesome tidbits thanks to our friends at Mantic. So we released our episode on army building. Today we're going to be talking about some of the new movement orders, withdraw. We'll be talking reform. We'll talk a little bit about sort of where those are now in the scope of game rules. But I'm curious, Dylan, now that you had a chance to sort of listen to our episode on list building, as we take a little deeper dive into how you make armies, what are you thinking? You know, are you liking the new system? Do you have trepidations? Are you excited, or sort of where are you sort of falling on the new army building construction?
I really like the army building, where they went with it, and how they like the flow chart style. It's pretty intuitive, like right out of the gate. I'm really excited to see like what options are going to be what units are going to be what unit type, and like how that's going to come into play with like list construction.
In looking at the system, and we'll have a couple of army reviews coming up, some spoilage, but that's really where the curious part is, right? Is what's going to be core, what's going to be specialist, what's going to be support. I'm really interested to see sort of where things fall, because during testing, we were testing a lot about that, right? Does this feel like it should be in core? Does this feel like it should be in specialist? Does it make sense? Can you make an army? Are there things in the specialist slot that you want, right? Because that was an element of when we were looking at testing, is to make sure it thematically and lore-wise made sense, but also did it make sense to have things in, you want to have things in each of those categories that you want to have in your army, right? If you're building that sort of system, you want to make sure that there's specialists and support stuff that you want. So I think that's what people are going to be waiting for bated breath around the army building system, is in their army, what's going to be in what category. So I'm curious, Dylan, and listening at that, any ideas sort of where your instinct goes? Do you think people are going to be sticking with the one battalion? Do you think people are going to be trying to fit in those multiple battalions? Or do you think it's really just going to come down army to army depending on what's in what category?
I mean, just a quick glance, I think 2 battalions so it really depends on where we land as far as like the average game. Does it need to go down, or does it need to go beyond 20? Is it 2,300 plus or 2,000? Or if it's 2,300 plus, I think most high end players are going to be in the 2 battalion area. I think to get as far as optimization. Now, again, it all depends on what units have what unit type, but
yeah,
based on the structure, like right off the bat, I think you're going to want 2 warlords. So you have to have 2 battalions.
I think Namagrok's a unique unit, so you could still only have 1 Nam.
Well, yeah, I guess those guys are screwed either way.
Unless it's like through the Spider-Verse, you have all the different alternate reality versions. You have Namagroks with like spelled with a C, all the different versions. But
yeah.
Namagrok 2099.
Ultimate Namagrok from the Ultimate Universe. My kind of sense is that too, somewhere in that 2 battalion, I'm thinking it's going to just be too many core choices, 8 core choices to unlock a 3rd battalion. Plus your, your mandatory hero commander slot. I think it's going to be maybe some of our spammy stuff does that.
Goblins might be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be in that 1 to 2. But what I'm really curious about, and I think it's such a great and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on it, of entering that creative space of maybe having some hero choices that change a unit. Maybe it's normally a specialist unit, but if you take this hero, it makes it core. Or
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about adding in that like little caveat?
I really like that. Like, I think that alleviates a lot of concerns around list building that have been kind of floating around the internet, because it's units that, like, at first glance are taken away, so to speak, where they're not able to use as many of them, can kind of come back into play more if a hero turns them into core choices, or moves support to auxiliary, or things like that. Yeah, there's like auxiliary moving to specialist, or like there's ways to move around, to move basically the unlocks. What used to be an unlock, there's a way to move those around. Optimize, I guess, is the best word for it. Is to optimize your choices.
Yeah, I think it's just adding some extra seasoning to the melting pot, right? I think we're going to have more levers. It's like, to me, I feel list building is going to have a little bit more ingredients now, whereas maybe we were dealing with just meat and veg. Now we have meat and veg and a little paprika, our little Cajun hot pepper. It's good at list building. I think we're going to have a little bit more to deal with. But so today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about the new, some new movement rules within the new edition. How has withdrawal changed? How has reform changed? Where is countercharge, etc. But before we get into that, just like how Rob and I in our last episode riffed on, we riffs.
Oh, God bless America! I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
If riff is the present indicative active conjugation of to riff, if I riff did is, I think, still correct.
Okay, I'll let you stretch it.
We'll see. We'll see. You guys can check me on that.
Get your Scrabble dictionaries out.
Get your Scrabble dictionaries out. But as we talked about previously about army list construction, let's just have a little roundtable on withdraw, sort of where it was at the end of 3.5. Like, why don't you go first, Rob? Where were you sort of on withdraw towards the end of the previous edition?
I could take it or leave it. The one beef I had with it is it's an optional rule. I don't like optional rules. I think if you write a game, you're telling your players and your tournament organizers or your event organizers to use. So I didn't like that. I could see the gaminess that really kind of cheesed off some of the new players. I could also see the gaminess of the fact that they sort of made it up as they went along. Like, the difference between withdraw and disengage, that withdraws wasn't a movement order, so that opened up shenanigans for some of the loot token scenarios where you could withdraw, drop a token, give it an actual movement order, and run ahead, and then somebody else from behind could, come up and pick it up. So, and I'm optimistic that this new withdraw is going to clean this up and give us everything else under the kitchen sink.
What about you, Dylan?
I'm of a similar mind on the optional rule side. Optional rules, that shouldn't be a thing for what I would label like a functionality rule, like a base rule, a base mechanic of the game. Optional rules, that should be like unit options or siege rules or stuff like that. Like, if your game is intended, if it's built with this rule in mind, then it shouldn't be optional. So hopefully they do away with that with core rules. And the withdraw itself, I personally didn't see any issues with it directly. It was more of like a few little bits and pieces that surrounded the withdraw rule were the real issues, and they never really addressed those. When they split withdraw and disengage like into two at the beginning of third, they were almost creating another problem rather than fixing the complaint of the old second edition bounce back. I just wish we still it was so bad that I kind of just wanted the bounce back.
Yeah, I feel like it was like they wanted to get rid of the bounce back, right? And then they kind of went down, they drank the Shrink Me potion and went down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole. And all of a sudden it was like, well, the bounce back is gone, but what about, the corkscrew? What about nimbles? What about all these like really high end gameplay patterns that they didn't want to take away? And I felt sometimes it became like a band-aid on a band-aid on a band-aid on a band-aid.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, you've changed and tweaked so many, the difference between disengaging versus the free withdrawal move versus can I just disengage by ordering a regular move and just moving away. I think we created sort of a space that was, for those players maybe you don't play all the time, or even players in tournaments you play all the time, and trying to tell them the difference between the free withdrawal move versus disengage, where using the free withdrawal move is you disengaging, but you can disengage through other. I mean, it became this like sort of convoluted mess, right?
Yeah.
So I am totally with you guys in that, and I think they've done it with this, which is if you remove a piece of strategy, make sure you're adding something else. And I think when we take a deeper look at these two new sort of rules around things that are sort of under the umbrella of what might have been previously withdraw, disengaging, countercharging, I think when we take a deeper look at these rules, you'll see they've removed some stuff, but the strategy is still there, which is I think the most core aspect of Kings of War. I'm curious what you guys think is the whole idea of a minute to learn, lifetime the master, which is make the rules simple, but the gameplay complex. And I think this is one of the areas of 3.5 where the rules were not simple for and it did kind of get into this field that it's like from Spider-Man, we got back to formula. I felt like in some ways we needed to go back to formula on this.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so previously the old withdrawal rule, right, is when your unit was facing an enemy in only one side, you could essentially get a free withdraw move of an inch, right? Where you could move back an inch and then you could issue an order, right? But there's all these rules around that, right? A withdrawal move, is it a move? You know what I mean? It's not a move order. You can't come within an inch of an enemy unit. You must travel the full inch. So it sort of did create that space of being confusing. And now they just got away with that, right? Withdraw is now just one of the different movement orders that you can give a unit. What do we think about that, of just taking it into and being like, instead of trying to say, well, this, it's now just simply withdraw is a movement order.
Cleans up a lot of questions in terms of the relation to scenario play, like we talked about with loot tokens. Makes it very clear.
Yeah, it takes away that freebie, that extra inch of movement that it gave you before.
All right, well, let's talk about how you actually make a withdraw movement order. So first up, a unit must only be engaged on one facing. Pretty straightforward. Next, roll the nerve test for the unit. If it's failed, the unit is routed. Does that remind you of anything? Has that ever been a thing?
Well, I think it's fascinating, Rob, because with the only two units being able to charge a unit, that means in combat units, that's a high commodity. So you would think then, well, I'm just going to always withdraw with my unit that I don't want to be fighting and then charge in with something else. But this makes you ask a tough tactical choice, right? If I'm trying to withdraw a unit to get away, as we'll see, as Rob tells us how we do that, to charge something else in, if I fail, my whole unit's dead. So I really like this. It feels like a choice with real consequence.
It's also kind of a stealth buff to chaff units and auxiliary units. If they come in and your opponent only deals a couple wounds to them and doesn't break them, and now you need them out of the way so your hammers can come in, well, you can just declare withdrawal with the intention of
hoping that they fail the test and die. Yeah, interesting.
So if the nerve test is successful, you pivot the unit so it faces the enemy unit it is engaged with. Then, after the unit faces directly towards the enemy unit, it moves backwards 2d6 inches. Now, here's the interesting parts. If the 2d6 inches brings you in contact with an enemy unit, the unit is routed. That's cool, Jeremy. That reminds me of some of the stuff back in Warhammer days. If the 2d6 inch movement brings you in contact with blocking terrain, the unit now stops and is now wavered. So here's one of those examples of why Fearless might be a thing. So if you want to withdraw a Fearless unit, it's not so bad. And Dylan, riffing On what you were talking about with getting chaff out of the way, this is also pretty cool. The unit may withdraw through friendly units. How many times have Amber Sprites blocked up the tyrants because they're too close? Now you can just bloop, back them through. Next, if the 2d6-inch withdraw ends on a friendly unit, the unit is moved further to clear friendly units. The unit is now wavered. So that's cool, right? So we said you can move through it, great. But if you can't clear, you still pop through, and now you're wavered. But does it really matter? Because you just wanted them out of the way.
Right.
I wonder what you think, Dylan. I think, like, and you bring up a really great point. I think chaff is going to be a little bit more predictable in the sense that if I'm blocking you with the chaff unit, and now I want to move that chaff unit out of the way, right? So I can charge you with something better. Two things are going to happen. Either I'm going to pass my nerve test, move enough distance out of the way to get out of my own way and charge in with something else. Or if I fail my nerve test, the chaff unit's dead, which usually chaff units, if you're not really banking on more than just one round of combat anyway, right? Or just like a blocking thing. So I actually think this feels a little smoother to me and a little bit more, the play pattern of chaff, I think, is just going to feel a little bit more predictable or elegant, or I don't know. What do you think?
It also creates a little paradox where you, like, how tight do you want your second line with your front line to be? Because, your average, in case you don't fail the nerve test, your average movement on 2d6 is what, 7? 6, 7?
Yes.
8?
7 is your most common roll on two
Yes.
6-sided dice.
So if you're not within 7, then it's still going to be blocking you. It's still going to be blocking that other unit. So, even, a faster hammer unit, you're going to want it within a reasonable distance of your front line. So if you ever are in that situation, you can just, if you get the minimum roll or your average roll, you're still going to have that space because you just place it right behind the unit it bumps in or it ends on. Is that right?
Right. And then it's wavered. What you guys are talking about too, though, keep in mind that in the movement phase now, most of the movement orders have the extra pivots. And so now it's going to be a lot easier to clear around chaff. So I think now the play is put that chaff right up in its grill because there's no 1-inch rule anymore. So get it right up in there. Get the other unit you want to go in the next round of combat right up in there. Make it so they can't charge you. And then you can just, if they kill your chaff, great. If they don't, you just back them up. But here's the thing about withdraw. The final thing I want to mention that's part of the rules made my head spin. It says units that withdraw may still use ranged attacks in the following range phase. So I don't know. Is disordered still a thing? I don't know what this means.
I think that there would be no practical use of a unit wavering after the withdraw if disordered had the same effect.
I'm not saying anything because this was a rule that had a lot of work on playtesting. They really focused on this in playtesting, on what are we going to do with the whole withdraw 1-inch thing. So my sense, and again, no inside baseball, my sense is that they will be able to shoot. And I could be wrong, like I said, when we see the full rules. But with how they mentioned all the other things around wavering, and it makes sense, right? Because shooting has taken a big hit. That here's a nice element of shooting chaff, is that they can go block, next turn they can withdraw and shoot. That's to me, that creates a lot of interesting usage of like combo shooting chaff.
This withdrawal rule makes me super excited.
It's pretty exciting.
There are some pretty cool shenanigans. I'm thinking in my head, like, if the person hit you in the flank, you can now withdraw. You get to pivot 90 degrees to face them and withdraw 90 degrees from where you started.
Rob, I was thinking too, let's say you have a horde or you have a unit that can take a flank charge. Let's say you position it in a way so that, let's say you can't get onto an objective, right? You give your opponent a flank charge on purpose that you're going to live, so that when you withdraw and you pivot and move backwards, you move backwards onto an objective. So I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting strategic uses of this rule.
I'll just say it. This is a lot more cool. than the old withdrawal rule.
Yeah.
Well, let's touch on some of the differences between the new and the old. The first is this is not an optional rule. This is in the game. Right. Number 2, it's a movement order. So assuming this precludes withdrawing and still being able to charge. Also, this we mentioned this before. It kind of eliminates the whole loot token drop where you withdraw, drop the token, charge back in. So that's gone. Interesting. Now you have to pass a nerve test to withdraw. And if you fail, you're routed. It's a random distance, 2d6, rather than just the 1 inch. You don't have to move the full distance. Like if you hit blocking terrain, you'll just stop. If you hit your own unit exactly on the dot, you'll stop. But you can go through your unit, and if you don't have enough to clear, you'll pop through and be wavered. If you back into an enemy unit, which I don't know why you'd want to purposely do that, but maybe dire consequences, you got to get those guys out of there to get their unit in, then that unit is routed. And then the whole thing about withdrawing units being able to still use a range attack, my money here is you can still shoot, even if you're disordered. That's my guess. Because shooting is so different. Can you imagine if that's true and you withdraw a trombone?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And at 2d6, Rob, that's such a huge variance. Think about the drama. That's going to be a roll like the key nerve roll. You're looking for boxcars, right? The withdrawal rolls, I think we're going to have there's going to be a lot of really exciting, I pivoted and an objective was 10 inches away and I rolled 12 on my withdrawal roll to like get on the objective, So I think it's going to add a lot of cool drama into the game, I think.
Because there's going to be, like your example with the trombone, Goblin players are going to have to choose, I would imagine. War Machines are going to be support. And so they're going to have to really make some choices in the War Machine category. I mean, yeah, they're probably more than likely going to be able to fit 3 battalions. You still can't take 3 lobbers, 3 sharpstick throwers, and 3 trombones.
I bet like a trombone's probably limited.
Like 2 per battalion.
Or maybe they say it's limited to 1 per battalion. I don't know.
Anyway, long story short, it's fair because there's going to be less of them, is what I'm trying to say. More than likely, it's kind of fair that you don't just that they still have a chance to do something after that initial engagement.
Yeah, I guess the only question I have looking through it, because we don't see all the rules, right? We just have the withdrawal rule here. Can the unit, when they're making that pivot, can they pivot through blocking terrain as long as they don't end the pivot, on the blocking terrain?
Oh, you mean that initial pivot to be facing? Yeah.
Yeah, that initial facing. I don't think they said that. So,
and this to me, Rob, I don't know how you feel. This is a real clear example of having like Alessio back.
This is the Alessio level awesomeness.
Yeah, it's just a professional rule. Just the simplicity of like, let's make things simple. Like things don't have to be complicated to be good, right? So we're going to make it a rules. We're going to make it a movement order. That simplifies it. Let's add some dynamic storytelling. Let's make it strategically interesting. I'm with you guys. I think this is an exciting change.
He explained this is one thing I'm good at. I'm good at accurately describing rules with 2 sentences versus 4 or 5 sentences.
Yeah.
And he put an example of that. So it was really nice to see.
Hi, this is Alessio Cavatore. I am the wargame designer, and you're listening to Countercharge.
So next, what we're going to talk about a little bit is sort of how has Countercharge changed. As we discussed, I think the spirit of the Countercharge is still there, but there is some different move orders that sort of bring in the idea of what Countercharge was. So, let's go with you first, Dylan, as far as Countercharge. What were your thoughts on Countercharge? Maybe talk about also the times when you make that decision to, do I want to issue a normal charge or do I want to issue a Countercharge, or take us a little bit through sort of where that rule was at the end of 3.5.
I mean, for me, Countercharge is like
the best podcast on the planet. I know, Dylan.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, I think the rule is kind of a part of the soul of Kings of War. It is one of the more simple and effective rules that has carried over ever since I've known the game. Simple in the fact that the name accurately describes the action that you take in the rule. At least for me, there's a couple things that need cleaned up, but again, it's like one of those things where it's more of little bits and pieces that surround the countercharge rule versus the countercharge rule itself. Like where arcs land, like based on terrain and other units and things like that. Sometimes it can create some confusion, especially with newer players. But that's kind of where I'm at with it at the end of 3.5.
You were describing how I felt the first time I saw Countercharge, because coming from Warhammer and those ilks of 90s, early 2000s ranks and flanks games, if you did really get outmaneuvered to the point where they got around you, it was pretty much game over. It eventually they're going to get you. But Countercharge gave you this new tool to handle someone that gets to your flank or gets to your rear. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to get out of it, because if they have multiple units, you're still in trouble. I thought it was a game changer in terms of a simple mechanic that really provides a lot of player agency in responding to threats as they hit your units.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that really kind of stood out of the rule is maybe being something not completely intuitive. And I think they've really solved this issue before, is instead of issuing a countercharge based on how all the angles, I'm now in your flank, even though I'm engaged with your front. So I'm going to issue a fresh charge. And since my leader point is in your flank, it's now a side charge. That was an element of the countercharge, right? Or when choosing to or not to choose a countercharge, which was not always intuitive to newer players.
Yeah, I think you hit on something too, that very confusing to new players. Countercharges were always to the front, but if your leader point was in the flank, you could choose to make a fresh charge, right? And take the flank and suffer the penalties of potentially being hindered, for example, because it's a fresh charge. And I think this new version of countercharge, not called countercharge anymore, this new version even more accurately describes the scrum. So let's get into the nuts and bolts. We'll go into how to reform. First, you can only reform if your unit is engaged on only one facing. Next, if engaged with a single enemy unit, the unit is placed in the front facing. So essentially, you just sort of you slide them over and you line them up. That's kind of like the classic countercharge.
One difference here is they're very clear about how units interact with each other. No longer is it sharing equal percentages. You want in a reform, your leader point, or now it's called your front facing midpoint, to be in contact with the other unit's front facing midpoint. So now it's a lot about making sure your front facing midpoint is where it's used to be, as opposed to trying to determine where, okay, your frontage is 150 millimeters, so that means I should do that. You know what I mean? So I think it's a little clearer. Especially they have some good diagrams in the book when you guys have a chance to see it.
And next up, here's where we really get farther away from countercharge in a good way. If engaged with two enemy units, obviously they both have to be in the same facing, you still pivot so that you cover as much of the front as possible, centrally as possible. And if you're bigger than them, say you have a horde or something, you want the overlap to be equal. Next, units using reform are not hindered, not dissimilar from countercharge. Reform can be combined with other friendly units, charge or reforming against the same unit. That can be part of a multi-charge, for example. Now, here's the interesting bit. Reform doesn't allow you to disengage from a unit you were engaged with or engage with a unit you were disengaged with. Before we get into what you guys think about reforming, let's add the other piece of the reform, which is called wrapping around. Only can be done if the unit is engaged with a single enemy unit. If you go back to reforming, you can reform if you're engaged on one side with multiple units, but if you have more than one enemy unit, you can't wrap around. Allows a unit to reform into another facing of the enemy unit if their midpoint of the unit is not in contact with the enemy unit, including corner to corner. Essentially what they're saying is, like, if you have a unit that's, let's say, a horde, and its midpoint is sticking out, it's not in contact with the facing. At that point, you then pick up the unit and you put it in place, and then you slide it down as central as possible to the enemy unit. When moved, the unit must finish with its front-facing midpoint with the enemy unit beyond the corner. In other words, if you can't get your midpoint onto the facing that you're wrapping around, then it's not legal. You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't do like a corner-to-corner charge, right?
Correct.
Basically,
Correct.
It's keeping the spirit of that. And I think they've kind of removed some of the language around shuffling. And to me, in looking at all the diagrams and reading the rules, you essentially align your units in combat when you're wrapping around or reforming the way that we all sort of intuitively want to in the first place, right? Which is trying to get the middle of your unit to the middle of their unit whenever possible, sharing space equally. So I think that this takes sort of intuitively what we wanted to do anyway when we were lining up units, and now it just got codified into the rules to where and especially since, and this is the one benefit about only having 2 units charge a facing, I think we're going to have a lot less discussion and sort of getting stuck on, can things fit? Can they move there? And, maybe we lose a little bit of strategy around denying space, but that's where enter in withdraw and enter in multiple battle lines, moving units in and out of combat. So I feel like this is a nice streamlined feel, and it is doing what I want to do intuitively anyway.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think it inherently cleans up a lot of those things that we mentioned earlier with countercharge, and even kind of helps with withdrawing with the way it was before, because that was a part of the major contention, was withdrawing to see what else you could charge and things like that. Where this is, you remain engaged and you have your options here, but how can you reform or wrap around to make room in other areas of the battlefield? I am sad to see, like I said, countercharge is a part of the soul of the game. I would have liked to have seen countercharge and then reform and wrap around be point A and point B under that. But, that's just me.
They're not as attached to the term as we are, obviously.
Yeah, and I don't know how good it sounds like welcome to Wraparound. This is Rob Finesse. I don't know how family friendly that will be as a show title, but...
Yeah, and we should also mention, when you're reforming and or wrapping around, you can still be part of a multi-charge. And with the way units move now, to your point, Dylan, I think it's maybe not a smart charge like we've thought about in the past, but I think units are going to take those positions, and it's going to open up the ability that coupled with, that's going to open up the ability to get some other units in relatively easy. I mean, withdraw and reforming and wrapping around all are going to make getting the right 2 units into that facing more possible. Well, let's talk about what are the differences. We'll start with the difference between reform and countercharge. So basically, reform allows a unit to remain engaged with multiple enemy units that it was engaged with before, which countercharge you couldn't, right? You could only countercharge one unit. The other unit gets shuffled back just a little tiny bit to indicate it's no longer engaged. This means a unit is not necessarily going to expose a flank charge next turn. Because, if you're hit by 2 units and you countercharge, you slide over to the unit you're countercharging. If you don't kill that unit and get to turn to face, you may have just given up a flank charge. So that's cool.
I'm curious, if you don't mind me jumping in for a second, Rob. That speaks into, and I think have they spoiled the fact that you split attacks now between different units?
It has. Yes, it does.
I'm curious, Dylan. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that yet. What are your thoughts on the...
He's smiling. I think you got your answer.
Okay, being able... Because this, to me, is another interesting aspect of, I think, determining how you split attacks with engaged with multiple units. That's going to be another shorthand strategy that people are going to have to develop.
Yeah, it's going to be... As someone who uses a lot of 30 attack units, I really like this change a lot.
Well, they might not have 30 attacks in the future. You never know.
I mean, that's true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So the other thing that's different between reform and countercharge is that reform doesn't let you disengage from a unit you were engaged with. So in other words, in the past, countercharge, you countercharge one of the 2 units and the other one is no longer engaged with you. You can't do that. So if you're reforming on one facing against 2 units, you still have to remain in contact with both those units. And so that might make charging in specific instances a little harder to charge in with fresh units. However, I think multi-charging is going to be a little easier with reforming. And I guess it's really not a reform thing, more about just the way multi-charges works, but the way you slide over and you position the unit so you fill the same overlap on the ends or the same frontage. Yeah. And then in terms of wrapping around versus countercharge, countercharges were always to the front. So wrapping around is, obviously to the flank. So that's a big difference.
If your front-facing midpoint is not touching your enemy, you are de facto in its flank based on the old rules, right? Because if you drew the arc of line of sight, it would your leader point, front-facing midpoint, would be in the flank. So I think it's the same difference, really. I think if you were in the flank previously and you could issue a charge to charge a flank, it's going to be the same here as far as the geometry is concerned.
Right. If your midpoint is touching the facing,
yeah, you can't wrap around because you could reform, right, and maybe get more centrally located if there's space or whatever. But you that wraparound is essentially your leader point. Your front-facing midpoint, I got to get in the habit of saying the right one, has to not be touching your enemy.
That may be one of the few spots where I'm like, why was that necessary?
Hi, this is Matt Gilbert, head of the design studio at Mantic Games. You are listening to Countercharge.
Or what do you think of reform and wraparound as a replacement for countercharge overall? Now that we've spilled the beans, so to speak.
I like it. I mean, I think it gets rid of the problems that we had with the 3.5 version of this. Yeah, I mean, I think it works. You can tell that a single person came up with these things, or for the most part, a single person came up with, because withdraw and then reform and wrap around, there's a lot of cohesion.
It all works together in like synergy, and with multi-charging and only having 2 units on a facing, a little more eloquently get something out of the way by either withdrawing, sliding over for a multi-charge, or reforming and wrapping around.
Yeah, I think you're going to have less time at the table determining, okay, does this fit? Where does this go? Can you complete this charge? Well, my intention was for you to not complete the charge based on, I think you're going to have less of that. But what you're going to have instead to replace that is, how am I going to use withdraw to get my second line in? How am I using my shooting chaff? How am I using this? So I think on the surface, it takes away some of the, I guess, higher end space denial play. But to me, I feel like that's being replaced with, and it speaks to taking Ronnie at his word, which really is, it's like the spirit of the game feels the same to me. It's just different.
There's a couple things though for me. I think it actually kind of plays better with regiments, because now a regiment can stay engaged with multiple units and not be worried about getting flanked, right? They can lock some stuff up. So if I charge in a cavalry unit to a unit, and right behind it, I have, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, a troop of whatever. I charge in, they do some combats back. I've lost all my TC. Oh no. I withdraw back through the chaff, and then I charge the chaff in. I think that's going to be a tactic for sure, because you don't have the crushing strength to rely on, I assume, right? We know the Abyssal's cavalry is TC3. So I assume that a lot of them will be TC3.
And shocking, Rob, like to ever think of knights who charge in and then run away to charge you again. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of strategy around. I think Kings of War 3.5 had more full line battle deployments. I wonder if 4th edition is going to have more staggered battle lines. I wonder if how we deploy is going to organically change. Instead of having one line, we have layers of deployment. That's one strategic thing that comes up for me. Are we going to see more layered deployment with this?
I think there will be more layered deployments. I deploy in layers a lot anyway, so it'll be interesting to see like how the metas modify and adjust to the new to reform and wrap around, and also like how many minutes in a game do you spend doing your 1-inch withdraw and checking line of sight to see potential corks?
Are you within an inch during movement?
Yeah, like I think this is gonna save, like, between the course of the game. This might say that this new rule might shave off like 5 to 10 minutes of just thinking time.
And then the fact you can only put 2 units in a charge on a facing, the fact that you don't have to take the most direct route, you can do whatever you want.
I'm Ronnie from Mantic Games, and you're listening to Countercharge.
Before we get out of here, Dylan, we did talk a little bit about the Arcane Library spellbook. What were your thoughts?
I was honestly expecting that to go away because that was one of the things that, was said was, why do we have multiple spellcasting systems? But I guess now it's just down to what the casters have access to and then the arcane spellbook.
That sounds right. Yeah. So whatever spells the armies have, and then you have the arcane library spellbook where they're all unique and you can only have one instance of those per army. Was there any of the spells you wanted that you picked out where like, that's pretty interesting? For me, Mindfog 3 for 15 or Mindfog 4 for 20, I still don't understand like how good that's going to be now that wavering's not a thing. Maybe they've changed Mindfog, so then now it does waver. I mean, Shattering's still nice, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe, yeah. I would almost bet that like Mindfog probably changed in some way, but I could be wrong. Because it was really strong before.
Everybody had it.
Yeah.
That and Hex, which not on the list. So that's going to be interesting. Is Hex still a thing? Some armies are going to have Hex, maybe? We certainly know, like, there are some other spells that are not on this list that other armies have that we used to have. So there is that. Was there any of these spells you wanted to talk about? You thought stand out for you?
Well, I just noticed that Host Shadow Beast is on this list, which means it's unique now, which it wasn't before, I don't think.
And Host Shadow Beast 8 for 30 points. Because it feels like 8's pretty hefty.
If I had to guess, I would say they're doing away with the in successes plus spellcaster level, all that. And it's probably just successes equal attacks.
Right. So if you have 8, you roll 4 of them, you got 4. At Crushing Streak 3.
Yeah. But yeah, the other ones are probably going to work similar to how they work now. If I'm just guessing based on what's on the list.
Dylan, final thoughts. You excited?
Super excited.
Well, on that note, we got to close it out in style. So until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter @countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.